Hi, back for episode 2 of the fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl. Look it up, that's how you're supposed to say it. So we're at the place where the big black caterpillar diggers were after the family, and they could even see them. They were right there next to them. And this chapter 6, is called The Race. Now there began a desperate race, the machines against the foxes. In the beginning, the hill looked like this, like that. And after about an hour, the machines bit away more and more soil from the hilltop. It looked like this, so it went from that to that. Sometimes the foxes would gain a little ground and the clanky noise would grow fainter, and Mr. Fox would say, "We're gonna make it, I'm sure we are." And then a few moments later, the machines would come back at them, and the crunch of the mighty shovels would get louder and louder. Once the foxes actually saw the sharp metal edge of one of the shovels as it scraped up the earth just behind them. "Hurry, foxes, hurry." "Keep going, my darlings," panted Mr. Fox. "Don't give up." "Keep going," the fat Bogus shouted to Bunce and Bean. "We'll get them any moment now." "Have you caught sight of him yet?" Bean called back. "Not yet," shouted Bogus, "but I think you're close." "I'll pick him up with my bucket," shouted Bunce. "I'll chop him to pieces." But by lunchtime, the machines were still at it, and so were the poor foxes. The hill now looked like this, and soon it looked like that. The farmers didn't stop for lunch. They were too keen to finish the job. "Hey there, Mr. Fox," yelled Bunce, leaning out of his tractor. "We're coming to get you now." They were mean. "You had your last chicken," yelled Bogus. "You'll never come prowling around my farm again." A sort of madness had taken hold of the three men. The tall, skinny Bean and dwarfish, pot-bellied Bunce were driving their machines like maniacs, racing the motors and making the shovels dig at a terrific speed. The fat Bogus was hopping about like a dervish and shouting, "Faster, faster, faster!" By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this is what happened to the hill. Do you know what the opposite of a hill is? A valley. They made the hill into a valley. The hole the machines had dug was like the crater of a volcano. It was such an extraordinary sight that crowds of people came rushing out from the surrounding villages to have a look. They stood on the edge of the crater and stared down at Bogus and Bunce and Bean. "Hey there, Bogus, what's going on?" "We're after a fox." "You must be mad." The people jeered and laughed, but this only made the three farmers more furious and more obstinate and more determined than ever not to give up until they had caught the fox. Chapter 7, We'll Never Let Him Go. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Bean switched off the motor of his tractor and climbed down from the driver's seat. Bunce did the same. Both men had had enough. They were tired and stiff from driving the tractors all day. They were also hungry. Slowly, they walked over to the small fox's hole at the bottom of the huge crater. Bean's face was purple with rage. Bunce was cursing the fox with dirty words that cannot be printed, and I cannot say them. Bogus came waddling up. "Dang and blast that filthy, stinking fox," he said. "What the heck do we do now?" "I'll tell you what we don't do," Bean said. "We don't let him go." "We'll never let him go," Bunce declared. "Never, never, never," cried Bogus. "Did you hear that, Mr. Fox?" yelled Bean, bending low and shouting down the hole. "It's not over yet, Mr. Fox. We're not going home until we've strung you up dead as a dingbat." Whereupon the three men all shook hands with one another and swore a solemn oath that they would not go back to their farms until the fox was caught. "What's the next move?" asked Bunce, the pot-bellied dwarf. "We're sending you down the hole to fetch him up," said Bean. "Down you go, you miserable midget." "Not me," screamed Bunce, running away. Bean made a sickly smile. When he smiled, you could see his scarlet gums. You saw more gums than teeth. Then there's only one thing to do, he said. We'll starve him out. We'll camp here day and night watching the hole. He'll come out in the end. He'll have to. So Bogus and Bunce and Bean sent messages down to their farms asking for tents, sleeping bags, and supper. The foxes began to starve. That evening, 3 tents were put up in the crater on the hill, one for Bogus, one for Bunce, and one for Bean. The tents surrounded Mr. Fox's hole, and the 3 farmers sat outside their tents eating their supper. Bogus had 3 boiled chickens smothered in dumplings. Bunce had 6 donuts filled with disgusting goose liver paste, and Bean had 2 gallons of cider. All 3 of them kept their guns beside them. Bogus picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" he shouted. "Lovely tender chicken. Why don't you come up and get it?" The rich scent of chicken wafted down the tunnel where the foxes were crouching. "Oh, Dad," said one of the small foxes, "couldn't we just sneak up and snatch it out of his hands?" "Don't you dare," said Mrs. Fox. "That's just what they want you to do." "But we're so hungry," they cried. "How long will it be until we get something to eat?" Their mother didn't answer them, nor did their father. There was no answer to give. As darkness fell, Bunce and Bean switched on the powerful headlamps of the 2 tractors and shone them on to the hole. "Now," said Bean, "we'll take in turn to keep watch. One watches while 2 sleep, and so on all through the night." Bogus said, "What if the fox digs a hole right through the hill and comes out on the other side? You didn't think of that one, did you?" "Of course I did," said Bean, pretending that he had. "Go on, tell us the answer," said Bogus. Bean picked something small and black out of his ear and flicked it away. "How many men have you got working on your farm?" he asked. 35, Bogus said. "I've got 36, Bunce said. "And I've got 37, Bean said. "That makes 108 men altogether. We must order them to surround the hill. Each man will have a gun and a flashlight. There will be no escape then for Mr. Fox." So the order went down to the farms, and that night 108 men formed a tight ring around the bottom of the hill. They were armed with sticks and guns and hatchets and pistols and all sorts of other horrible weapons. This made it quite impossible for a fox, or indeed for any other animal, to escape from the hill. The next day the watching and waiting went on. Bogus and Bunce and Bean sat upon small stools staring at the fox's hole. They didn't talk much. They just sat there with their guns on their laps. Every so often Mr. Fox would creep a little closer toward the mouth of the tunnel and take a sniff. Then he would creep back and say, "They're still there." "Are you quite sure?" Mrs. Fox would ask. "Positive," said Mr. Fox. "I can smell that man Bean a mile away. He stinks." Mr. Fox has a plan. For 3 days and 3 nights, this waiting game went on. "How long can a fox go without food or water?" Bogus asked on the 3rd day. "Not much longer now," Bean told him. "He'll make a run for it soon. He'll have to." Bean was right. Down in the tunnel, the foxes were slowly but surely starving to death. "If only we could just have a tiny sip of water," said one of the small foxes. "Oh, Dad, can't you do something? Couldn't we make a dash for it, Dad? We have a little bit of a chance, wouldn't we?" "No chance at all," snapped Mrs. Fox. "I refuse to let you go up there and face those guns. I'd sooner you stay down here and die in peace." Mr. Fox had not spoken for a long time. He had been sitting quite still, his eyes closed, not even hearing what the others were saying. Mrs. Fox knew that he was trying desperately to think of a way out, and now as she looked at him, she saw him stir himself and get slowly to his feet. He looked back at his wife. There was a little spark of excitement dancing in his eyes. "What is it, darling?" said Mrs. Fox quickly. "I've just had a bit of an idea," he said carefully. "Come on," said Mrs. Fox. "Tell us quickly." "Well," said Mrs. Fox. Then he stopped and sighed and sadly shook his head. He sat down again. It's no good. It won't work after all. Why not, Dad? Because it means more digging, and we aren't any of us strong enough for that after 3 days and nights without food. Yes, we are, Dad, cried the small foxes, jumping up and running to their father. We can do it. You can see if we can't. So can you. Mrs. Fox looked at the 4 small foxes, and he smiled. What fine children I have, he thought. They are starving to death, and they haven't had a drink for 3 days, but they are still undefeated. I must not let them down. I suppose we could give it a try, he said. Let's go, Dad. Tell us what you want us to do. Slowly, Mrs. Fox got to her feet. She was suffering more than any of them from the lack of food and water. She was very weak. I am so sorry, she said, but I don't think I'm going to be much help. You stay right where you are, my darling, said Mr. Fox. We can handle this by ourselves. Boggis Chicken House number 1. This time we must go in a very special direction, said Mr. Fox, pointing sideways and downward. So he and his 4 children started to dig once again. The work went much more slowly now, yet they kept at it with great courage, and little by little the tunnel began to grow. Dad, I wish you would tell us where we are going, said one of the children. I dare not do that, said Mr. Fox, because this place I am hoping to get to is so marvelous that if I described it to you now, you would go crazy with excitement. And then if we fail to get there, which is very possible, you would die of disappointment. I don't want to raise your hopes too much, my darlings. For a long time they kept on digging. For how long, they did not know, because there was no days and no nights down there in the murky tunnel. But at last Mr. Fox gave the order to stop. I think, he said, we'd better take a peep upstairs now and see where we are. I know where I want to be, but I can't possibly be sure we're anywhere near it. Slowly, wearily, the foxes began to slope the tunnel upwards toward the surface. Up and up it went until suddenly they came to something hard above their heads, and they couldn't go up any further. Mr. Fox reached up to examine this hard thing. It's wood, he says, wooden planks. What does that mean, Dad? It means, unless I am very much mistaken, that we are right beneath somebody's house, whispered Mr. Fox. Shh, be very quiet now while I take a peek. Carefully, Mr. Fox began pushing up one of the floorboards. The board creaked most terribly, and they all ducked down, waiting for something awful to happen. Nothing did. So Mr. Fox pushed up a second board, and then very, very cautiously, he poked his head up through the gap. He let out a shriek of excitement. I've done it, he yelled. I've done it. First time I've done it. I've done it. I've done it. He pulled himself up through the gap in the floor and started prancing and dancing with joy. Come on up, he sang out. Come on up and see where you are, my darlings. What a sight for a hungry fox. Hallelujah. Hooray. Hooray. The 4 small foxes scrambled up and out of the tunnel, and what a fantastic sight it was now that met their eyes. They were in a huge shed, and the whole place was teeming with chickens. They were white chickens and brown chickens and black chickens by the thousands. Boggis Chicken House number 1, cried Mr. Fox. It's exactly what I was aiming at. I hit it slap in the middle, first time. Isn't that fantastic? And if I might say so, rather clever. The small foxes went wild with excitement. They started running around in all directions, chasing the stupid chickens. Wait, ordered Mr. Fox. Don't lose your head. Stand back. Calm down. Let's do this properly. First of all, everyone have a drink of water. They all ran over to the chickens' drink through and lapped up the lovely cool water. Then Mr. Fox chose 3 of the plumpest hens, and with a clever flick of his jaws, killed them instantly. Back to the tunnel, he ordered. Come on. Whew. No fooling around. The quicker you move, the quicker you shall have something to eat. One after another, they climbed down through the hole in the floor, and soon they were all standing once again in the dark tunnel. Mr. Fox reached up and pulled the floorboards back into place. He did this with great care. He did it so that no one could tell they had ever been moved. "My son," he said, giving the 3 plump hens to the biggest of his 4 small children, "run back with these to your mother. Tell her to prepare a feast. Tell her the rest of us will be along in a jiffy as soon as we have made a few other arrangements." A surprise to Mrs. Fox. The small fox ran back along the tunnel as fast as he could, carrying the 3 plump hens. He was exploding with joy. "Just wait," he kept thinking, "just wait until Mummy sees these." He had a long way to run, but he never stopped once, and on the way he came bursting in upon Mrs. Fox. "Mummy," he cried, out of breath. "Look, Mummy, look, wake up and see what I brought you. Mrs. Fox, who was weaker than ever now from lack of food, opened one eye and looked at the hens. "I'm dreaming," she murmured, and closed her eyes again. "You're not dreaming, Mummy. They're real chickens. We're safe. We're not going to starve." Mrs. Fox opened both eyes and quickly sat up. "But my dear child, where on earth?" "Bogus's chicken house #1, spluttered the small fox. "We tunneled right up under the floor, and you've never seen so many big fat hens in all your life. And Dad said to prepare a feast. They'll be back soon." The sight of food seemed to give new strength to Mrs. Fox. "A feast it shall be," she said, standing up. "Oh, what a fantastic fox your father is. Hurry up, child, and start plucking those chickens." Far away down the tunnel, the fantastic Mr. Fox was saying, "Now for the next bit, my darlings. This one will be as easy as pie. All we have to do is dig another little tunnel from here to there." "To where, Dad?" "Don't ask so many questions. Start digging." Now we have Badger chapter. Mr. Fox and the 3 remaining small foxes dug fast and straight. They were all too excited now to feel tired or hungry. They knew they were going to have a whacking great feast before long, and the fact that it was none other than Bogus's chickens they were going to eat made them churgle with laughter every time they thought of it. It was lovely to realize that while the fat farmer was sitting up there on the hill waiting for them to starve, he was also giving them their dinner without knowing it. "Keep digging," said Mr. Fox. "It's not much farther." All of a sudden, a deep voice above their heads said, "Who goes there?" The foxes jumped. They looked up quickly, and they saw peeking through a small hole in the roof of the tunnel a long, black, pointed, furry face. "Badger!" cried Mr. Fox. "Foxy!" cried Badger. "My goodness me, I'm glad I found someone at last. I've been digging around in circles for 3 days and nights, and I haven't had the foggiest idea of where I am." Badger made the hole in the ceiling bigger and dropped down beside the foxes. A small badger, his son, dropped down right after him. "Haven't you heard what's happening up on the hill?" Badger said excitedly. "It's chaos. Half the wood has disappeared, and there are men with guns all over the countryside. None of us can get out, even at night. We're all starving to death." "Who is we?" asked Mr. Fox. "All us diggers. That's me and Mole and Rabbit and all our wives and children. Even Weasel, who can usually sneak out of the tightest spots, is right now hiding down my hole with Mrs. Weasel and 6 kids. What are we going to do, Foxy? I think we're finished." Mr. Fox looked at his 3 children and he smiled. The children smiled back at him, sharing his secret. "My dear old Badger," he said, "this mess you're all in is my fault." "I know it's your fault," said Badger furiously, "and the farmers are not going to give up until they've got you. Unfortunately, that means us as well. It means everyone on the hill." Badger sat down and put a paw around his small son. "We're done for," he said softly. "My poor wife up there is so weak she can't dig another yard." "Nor can mine," said Mr. Fox, "and yet at this very minute she is preparing for me and my children the most delicious feast of plump, juicy chickens." "Stop!" cried Badger. "Don't tease me. I can't stand it." "It's true," cried the small foxes. "Dad's not teasing. We've got chickens galore." "And because everything is entirely my fault," said Mr. Fox, "I invite you to share the feast. I invite everyone to share it. You and Mole and Rabbit and Weasel and all your wives and children. There'll be plenty to go around, I can assure you." "You mean it?" cried Badger. "You really mean it?" Mr. Fox pushed his face close to Badger's and whispered darkly, "Do you know where we've just been?" "Where?" "Right inside Boggis's chicken house number 1. "No." "Yes, but that is nothing to where we are going now. You have come just at the right moment, my dear Badger. You can help us dig, and in the meanwhile your small son can run back to Mrs. Badger and all the others and spread the good news." Mr. Fox turned to the small Badger and said, "Tell them they are all invited to a fox's feast. Then bring them all down here and follow this tunnel back until you find my home." "Yes, Mr. Fox," said the small Badger. "Yes, sir, right away, sir. Oh, thank you, sir." And he scrambled quickly back through the hole in the roof of the tunnel and disappeared. And that's the end of episode number 2. Thank you, and I'll see you for episode 3 in a minute.